But as much as we grieve this particular tragedy, I think it's important, as I mentioned at the White House, to step back and recognize these tragedies have become far too commonplace. Few people understand the terrible toll of gun violence like mayors do. And whether it's a mass shooting like the one in Charleston or individual attacks of violence that add up over time, it tears at the fabric of the community. It costs you money and it costs resources. It costs this country dearly. More than 11,000 Americans were killed by gun violence in 2013 alone. 11,000. If Congress had passed some common sense gun safety reforms after Newtown, after a group of children had been gunned down in their own classroom, reforms that 90% of the American people supported, we wouldn't have prevented every act of violence, or even most. We don't know it would have prevented what happened in Charleston. No reform can guarantee the elimination of violence, but we might still have some more Americans with us. We might have stopped one shooter. Some families might still be whole. Y'all might have to attend fewer funerals. And we should be strong enough to acknowledge this. At the very least, we should be able to talk about this issue as citizens, without demonizing all gun owners who are overwhelmingly law-abiding, but also without suggesting that any debate about this involves a wild-eyed plot to take everybody's guns away. I know today's politics makes it less likely that we see any sort of serious gun safety legislation. I remarked that it was very unlikely that this Congress would act. And some reporters, I think, took this as resignation. I want to be clear, I am not resigned. I have faith we will eventually do the right thing. I was simply making the point that we have to move public opinion. We have to feel a sense of urgency. Ultimately, Congress will follow the people. And we have to stop being confused about this. At some point as a country, we have to reckon with what happens. It is not good enough simply to show sympathy. You don't see murder on this kind of scale, with this kind of frequency, in any other advanced nation on earth. Every country has violent, hateful, or mentally unstable people. What's different is not every country is awash with easily accessible guns. And so I refuse to act as if this is the new normal, or to pretend that it's simply sufficient to grieve and that any mention of us doing something to stop it is somehow politicizing the problem. We need a change in attitudes among everybody. Lawful gun owners, those who are unfamiliar with guns. We have to have a conversation about it and fix this. And ultimately, Congress acts when the public insists on action. And we've seen how public opinion can change. We've seen it change on gay marriage. We've seen it beginning to change on climate change. We've got to shift how we think about this issue. And we have the capacity to change. but we have to feel a sense of urgency about it. We as a people have got to change. That's how we honor those families. That's how we honor the families in Newtown. That's how we honor the families in Aurora. Now, the first time I spoke at this conference in 2008, I said that America shouldn't be succeeding despite Washington. They should be succeeding with some help from Washington. And as president, I've made it a priority to partner with mayors like you. That's why I've named 3 former mayors to my cabinet. That's why I asked a former president of this conference, Jerry Abramson, to be one of my top advisors.
President Obama speaking at the United States Conference of Mayors in San Francisco. Clearly his most extensive remarks since the horrific shooting in South Carolina. The president making the case that legislation can be passed and it will save lives. He talked about Newtown and talked about background checks and, of course,